A good Erev Shabbos, Parshas Shoftim, we have one of the mitzvahs of appointing a king. The Parsha says, you shall place upon yourselves a king, that the Lord your God shall choose. Hashem shall select this king. It shall not be by a democratic process. It should not be determined by a Congress or a Senate, or even by the votes of the majority of the people, but rather it will be determined by God himself as revealed to us through his prophets. And then the Torah teaches us some of the laws that are relevant to this king of Israel. One of them is that when he sits on his throne, he shall write this Mishnah Torah. What is Mishnah Torah? Mishnah Torah, like Lechem Mishnah, means 2 loaves of bread, suggests 2. Here also the Talmud teaches us, he shall write 2 Torah scrolls, and they shall be written in the presence or be under the supervision of the Kahanim from the tribe of Levi. This Torah scroll will be with him. He shall read it every day of his life, so that he shall learn to be in awe of the Lord his God, to observe all of the words of this Torah. The next verse says, so that his heart should not be haughty and arrogant as he rules over his brethren. There are a few questions that our sages pose. Number one, why is it that he has to write 2 Torah scrolls? Indeed, why does he have to write any Torah scrolls? A king usually succeeds his father. He shall inherit the Torah scrolls from his father. Yes, there is a biblical mitzvah that every single Jew should write his own Torah scroll. So fine, let him write 1. He'll write his own Torah scroll. He'll inherit from his father. Why does he have to have 2? What's the purpose of this? In addition, what does he do with this second Torah? One of them he reads from every day. What does he do with the second one? Rashi tells us from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Shtei Sifrei Torah. There are 2 Torah scrolls that he writes. One will be placed in his treasure house, his treasury, with all his precious possessions. It says imai, and one that goes in and goes out with him. So the sages ask, what's the purpose of having a Torah scroll that's going to be stored in a treasury? What's the purpose? To show that the Torah is precious? Is it not enough that he has a Torah scroll with him every single day when he goes in, when he goes out? He always has this Torah scroll with him. Doesn't that indicate how precious, how important, how significant, how prominent the Torah is? What value is there to have a Torah scroll that's sitting somewhere in a museum? What's the purpose? In addition, why does it say that the Torah scroll will be written in the presence, under the tutelage of the Kahanim the Leviim? Are the Kahanim the Leviim, are they the only ones in possession of a Torah scroll? Why can it not be written under the tutelage and supervision of a great Torah sage who's not a Kohen, he's not a Levi? What does it mean, the Kahanim the Leviim? And finally, as the Parsha begins, this king is not determined by man, chosen by Hashem, such as King Saul, King David, King Solomon. Who is this that's chosen by Hashem? It's a person who is filled with an awe and a love of Hashem. It is a person like David HaMelech, the author of Psalms. It is someone like King Solomon, the author of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. We're talking about somebody who is the symbol, the paramount symbol, the prototype of living a life in awe and love of Hashem. This is the person that we must read from the Torah every day in order to learn to be in awe of Hashem, to observe his mitzvahs. Yes, the Ramban does say that the Torah is concerned that a person who he ascends to the throne and rules over his brethren, it is very possible that he can be influenced by the power of his position, and perhaps he have his awe of Hashem and observance erode. So the Torah tells us, no, he'll study the Torah every day, and he will learn to retain and maintain his awe. Excellent explanation. Nevertheless, the question remains. There are many amongst us found within Klal Yisrael who they are satisfied in their pursuit of Judaism, relying on tradition. This is what they saw in their father's house, their grandparents' house. This is what they do, and that's enough. They have some traditions. Maybe they'll make kiddush, they'll light the candles, maybe they'll have a seder, whatever. Maybe they'll come here shofar blowing. That's enough. Tradition is a very beautiful thing, and it's very important. But if we limit our Jewish growth to just a tradition that's been handed down, we're stifling ourselves. We shall not remain stagnant, but we will fall, and it shall impact upon the next generations. And that's why we see so many of those who had their traditions, that their children and grandchildren go astray. Sometimes we cannot even recognize anything Jewish about them. There are those who say, I'm not going to just rely on tradition. I'll study. I'll open a book here and there. I'll open a chumash. I'll learn a little bit or whatever it might be. And that's sufficient. That's a wonderful thing. To be able to study Torah, set aside some time every day, 10 minutes, a half an hour, whatever it might be, magnificent. It's wonderful. I wish everyone would engage and do this. But even that, we're denying ourselves the true appreciation of our Torah. For if we're just going to study by ourselves, or we're going to look at the verse and maybe a translation or whatever, we're not going to get the full insight. We're not going to know how to analyze and appreciate the remarkable boundless depth that's found within each and every word of the Torah. Not just the written law, but the oral law. This is something in which we must seize and embrace a mentor, someone who can teach us, a great sage, a great Torah scholar, who he himself studied from great Torah scholars. From generation to generation, as it was passed down the Masorah, in which we can eventually connect to Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who came from Sinai, teaching us the Torah. What did we do in the desert for 40 years? Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching us the Torah. He was teaching us the meaning of the written law. He taught us the oral law. Torah's Moshe, the Torah of Moshe. Moshe, the laws, the halacha of Moshe Misina, the laws that Moshe received at Sinai. This is what has been transmitted to us. How are we going to open the key to the portals of the incredible wisdom? And not only the wisdom, but to be able to sense the great enlightenment and the great sanctity that lies within every thought of the Torah, to elevate ourselves, to bring us happiness in this world. We must find the right teachers. But not everybody had an opportunity to study in a yeshiva. Not everyone had an opportunity to attend a seminary, go to a Beis Yaakov. So what can we do? We are blessed. We are blessed that we live in an age in which we have so much printed material in English for us to understand. The entire Talmud has been translated for us. The entire Talmud has explanations to help us understand. We still need to have a teacher. Yes, we can find teachers. We can even find teachers online. We can even have virtual classes. We can even find a Rebbe in Israel, and we can attend the shir of this Rebbe. We can do so online. We can do so. We can find it. This is the blessing that we have. The Torah is telling us, don't rely on the Torah scrolls of your father. Beautiful. Respect it. Revere it. But don't limit yourself to that, to the traditions. We'll be denying ourselves. And don't rely just on one Torah scroll that we write. Don't rely on just one Torah scroll that we'll write and we'll study every day. But rather we need to have a second Torah, what is the purpose of that second Torah? That second Torah, it has to be our treasure. It's got to be in our treasure house. The Marav Shemesh says, you know what this treasure is? The treasure house? What, is it talking just about being in some vault somewhere that belongs to a king? Yes, simply it does mean that, but it means more than that. It means the treasure of inscribing the Torah on our hearts, our minds, our souls. That's the great treasure. That the Torah should be a treasure that we would put it away in a museum, but rather it lives within us. That's what the Torah is referring to. And we must seek out the wisdom of the Torah, not just from our own personal study, but under the tutelage of not just a scribe, but of the Kahanim, the Leviim, the great teachers, those who have been entrusted with the responsibility of passing from generation to generation the knowledge, the love, the awe of Hashem and His Torah. And that's why it says that even a king like King David, a king like King Solomon, there's no boundaries to the depth and the sanctity and the wisdom of Torah. It is a source of happiness in this world, giving us meaning and purpose, and it opens up the world to come for all eternity. And therefore, one will not just retain the awe, grow in our observance as we grow in our comprehension. This is what the Torah is referring to by the king. The Chavetz Chaim tells us that when we stood at Sinai, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell all of Klal Yisrael, Atem tihiyu li mamleches kahana v'goy kodesh. You shall be to me a nation of kings, a nation of kahanim, a holy nation. It means that every single Jew is a melech, a king, a malka, a queen, a prince, a princess. We possess that ability. Therefore, the Chavetz Chaim says when the Torah is outlining the laws and the rules for a king of Israel, it's talking to each and every one of us. And the Torah is telling us, don't rely just on tradition. Don't rely on opening a book here and there and reading and thinking that we're going to understand and be able to observe and pass down the love of Judaism and the appreciation to future generations. But we must do more. Find that Rebbe, find that mentor, find that sage. We can find it in the great works that have been translated and are available to us today. We can find it in our communities. We can find it online. Every single Jew is a king and a queen. And every single Jew has the opportunity to grow in our love and awe of Hashem and His Torah and His mitzvahs. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay Jewish. Have a good Shabbos.